Neil. The stage is yours, so to speak.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. Okay. Yeah, this is going to be a joint presentation between Tao Do, Marcus Busi, and myself. Tao and I work within the Uppsala University at SweetEst, and I'm also part of the Sustainability Research Centre at the University of the Sunshine Coast, which is where Marcus is permanently based. Before starting, I just wanted to acknowledge that it's not just us who are involved in the work package, it's a larger group of partners, and you can see them there in that slide. The title of our work package is interesting in a sense, and where it's come from. And I guess when we're thinking about sort of rethinking environmental communication, we're also thinking that the legacy of environmental communication sort of grows out of, this larger area of science communication. And I just think this slide is interesting because it's a very contemporary slide. It's a framework that has been probably one of the most successful frameworks in terms of science communication. It's the planetary boundaries concept. And what you can see there is that it's a sort of quite a shocking concept in a sense, and very, very telling. But what you can see is in the slide, you can see the green space in the middle there, which is meant to be the sort of safe operating space for humanity. And a group of scientists have come up with these planetary boundaries and in terms of, Earth system stability. And apparently we have sort of, in a way, transgressed or moved beyond some of those planetary boundaries. And we hear a lot about climate change. But we also hear a lot about biodiversity and so on, and we've moved beyond those. And it's a very powerful narrative. And I just put that, you probably read it as I've been speaking. I just put that up there just for you to think about a little bit about the origins of this and where it came from. Initially a cup of coffee, breakfast meeting, a small group of experts, then a little bit of a larger group who actually came up with these 9 boundaries during a meeting in 2008. Just something to come back to and think about. The second depiction here, which is called the donut, originally developed in 2012 by Kate Raworth as a response, in a way, to the planetary boundaries, saying, hang on, it's the safe operating space for humanity is not just about planetary boundaries, it's also about our human well-being. And inside here you can see, in terms of well-being, we've transgressed a lot of the indicators that Kate came up with. In contrast to the planetary boundaries narrative, this, when they advertise this, you can see the citations to the frameworks, and this one has received 90. The planetary boundaries has received 3,600, which they put on the website, in terms of, like, let's say, the metric for science communication. But what is also more interesting is the planetary boundaries concept is very much aligned to the status quo in terms of governance, and those boundaries are very, very much aligned to the sectors, and these boundaries have been quantified. So it's very easy to set up targets for decision makers, indicators. They have models in place to monitor progress and so on. So because it fits so well with the status quo, it can be taken on board easily. In terms of the donut and the well-being, these more subjective indicators, difficult to quantify and measure, and subsequently tends to gain far little traction because it doesn't sort of fit in with the pre-existing frameworks or modes of governance. What I probably neglected to say was that there is of course, these ideas have generated a lot of conflicts of interest, because often there's an argument that if you try and sort of work towards one planetary boundary, then because you're doing it in sectors, it could be in conflict with another planetary boundary. And it becomes even more important when you think about working within sectors towards one planetary boundary, and then you actually have all these considerations about human well-being to consider. If they're not sort of built into that, then often those get magnified or amplified. And this slide is simply about the fact that we're entering a real terrain, a wicked terrain, what we call a whole set of wicked problems that can be created operating or working in this way, which traditional science communication tends to reinforce, in a sense, the way it happens. So, sort of moving from framing to practice, this picture on the right-hand side depicts, in a way, the domain where traditional science and science communication works best, when there are sort of clear causal relationships, cause and effect. And experts can do this in a way separate from the actions. On the left-hand side is when you're entering very complex situations where you can't sort of determine cause and effect before you actually act on the system. And the practice needs to be emergent because of that. And even in very extreme situations, a bit like the COVID-19 we have now here, that we don't sort of see necessarily any relationships between cause and effects. And we actually just, all we can do is really act, because we don't have the evidence to know to know what's going to happen. We can't project what's going to happen. And this is quite a useful framework. And I think the left-hand side sort of tells us something a little bit about, or gives us a hint that we're moving into new terrain here, that it's not simply just doing the research and then transferring the sort of extending the science and the findings to those performing the actions. That the actual scientific process of the research needs to be actually built upon actually acting within it, so that action and research become sort of an integrated thing. This slide is basically sort of tells us that if we're going to sort of safeguard, legitimacy of decision making under wicked systems, we need to move away a little bit from this sort of working just with experts to sort of broaden that community of practice, generating the knowledge. We need to sort of build in new perspectives when we're navigating new terrain. When impacts tend to be very systemic, we need to sort of include those that are actually implementing actions, and also a broader set of perspectives that can reflect, the systemic consequences of our actions. We need to move a little bit from, this picture of, this hardcore body of experts to sort of these, constellations, making a shift from a small group to a sort of larger but also new constellations of actors that will surface sort of new things to make our work more legitimate and relevant. We need to tap into the wisdom of crowds. And this means that in terms of our communication practices here, that we need to sort of move a little bit from this prescriptive knowledge that can be sort of normalized in our practices, or we can use it to sort of regulate markets, to sort of coerce collective action, or even raise awareness, to a situation or a process, a knowledge co-production process, where the knowing occurs within the act of constructing and responding to problems. Just sort of finish off, in terms of our work package, we have four main aims, and that's, to critically examine existing environmental communication practice in our case study context, which you're going to hear about in a minute, the case studies, what is it? Is it this traditional science communication, or has it gone beyond that? As part of our work within the case studies, we want to try and sort of surface new and different ways of co-creating knowledge, so that we can bring about sort of transformation in our case study context. We want to look at, well, what are the challenges and opportunities for knowledge co-production, particularly that sort of knowledge that can support these sustainable transformations. And of course, when we're sort of building this sort of community of practice, let's say this extended group beyond the group that normally does knowledge production, we need to sort of empower them with a type of capability that gives them an ability to navigate these wicked situations. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Tao,
Thank you.
to continue.
I'm gonna share my screen first. Can you see it? Slideshow.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, I think I took over the screen sharing already. Thank you, Neil. In order to achieve the aims set out by the work package that Neil had just spoken about, one of the contexts we're going to look at is education and learning for sustainable development, or ESD in short. So the main idea of this case study is to create a virtual co-creation lab as an enabling environment for fostering knowledge co-productions in ESD. And the lab will straddle three country contexts, namely Sweden, Vietnam, and Australia. The idea of developing a co-creation lab actually is based on the premise that this kind of model has emerged in response to a growing demand for alternative methods and approaches in knowledge co-productions in order to deal with wicked issues or challenges, those that are characterized by interdependency, complexity, messiness, and uncertainty. Hence, we can't really use traditional methods to address them. So what do you picture when you picture a lab? I get these images often come up. Scientists wearing white coats, microscopes, chemical glasswares, just to name a few. But what we propose here is an unusual, different kind of lab, one that supports dialogue and connections, a lab that pays attention to all the different voices. I mean, not only voices coming from scientists, academic actors, but also from a wider diverse set of societal actors. A lab that can provide a safe space for new ideas, perspectives, and approaches to emerge, and a lab that can work towards bringing about change. So our co-creation lab is, or our idea of this co-creation lab is a new kind of environment that fosters creative, inclusive, cross-sector and cross-disciplinary collaborations in wicked contexts. And it's a new mode of science that embraces co-productions as core concept, where we shift from single expertise to multiple expertise brought by a diverse set of stakeholders. And it's also a virtual space where research and practice are intertwined, or as Neil said earlier, where actions and research become integrated, where we don't really see boundaries between academic and non-academic actors. In other words, the lab is a structure that not only thinks, but also does. I mean, here we aim to explore and experiment with different alternative solutions to real-world challenges. And so what are we gonna do in this lab? So the lab is not really a physical space, but a facilitated process to enable co-creation activities. And most of it will take place in a virtual setting. And the process in the lab is broken down into 5 phases. In the first phase, analyzing the context, we try to understand the challenges, the policy and the institutional environments that in different country contexts that shapes those challenges, and also, I mean, the capability of the lab for addressing them. Moving on to the second phase, where we will structure our learnings about the different contexts and stakeholders, you know, to gain multiple perspectives about the challenges, and by doing so, we reframe the challenges. And based on those insights and reflections in the previous phases, we try to elaborate on ideas to address those challenges and envision new alternatives, and turn this idea into coherent approaches. And in the next way, we will enact those selected alternatives in real life conditions. And last but not least, we evaluate the selected approaches for improvement and adaptations. And ultimately, drawing on the insights generated within the lab, hopefully we can create intercultural implications and new practices for learning in wicked times. So that's about it, one of the case study in the work package, and I will hand over to Marcus to tell us about another case study.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll just pull it up like that. So this is a really good hot topic. I had to get that in right off the beginning, so it was a bad pun. Looking at this case study is going to look at the fires and the challenge of communicating fires, both within the Swedish context of your forest fires and the recent Australian context. All right, I hit that wrong thing. I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. I've got a very excited screen here. So I'll just pull it down. You didn't get disturbed, but I did. So the core element of communication around fires has been quite emotive, and it's been a tug of war between, let's say, the sciences and the, I guess, the public opinions that swing to and fro between the pros and the cons. There's been a lot of contested language going on, and it brings the focus of this case study down, in a sense, to the kind of narrative drives that propel such hot topics. So I want to look at knowledge co-production in a similar way to which Tao has described it in the Learning Lab. Knowledge is something that's co-produced in cultural contexts. So it's about how much cultural agency people have when they are dealing with making sense or sense-making. It draws on a kind of creative traditionalism where, in Australia, I'm not so familiar with Sweden, we have very strong and powerful narratives about fires and the deserts and the dry and the extremes of, you know, climates and so on. So these traditions are actually drawn upon by both conservatives and I guess progressives when we're struggling over what communication is valid around the fire issue. So we're seeking to explore that and via fostering cultural citizenship, which is a way of returning agency to those who are the stakeholders in the understanding of communicative praxis in relationship to fires in both Sweden and Australia. Lastly, the resilience is fostered through as a response to uncertainty and complexity. And this leads us to the ability to look at cultural engagement is working with narratives as sense-making schema. And the essential process is going to be looking at a genealogy of fire communication, possibly even over more than a century, and then unpacking that through critique and then transforming it, the understandings through collective co-productive engagements with communities. We're going to be running workshops and so on. Given that we're looking at narratives, we want to change the rules around the way narratives work. So I want to suggest that we're suggesting that, you know, we can start hacking narratives on both sides. This is a wonderful little quote from one of our more conservative commentators, propaganda in relation to climate change, from the classroom to the university to politicians and to most of the media, has to give us cause for concern. That kind of narrative is very powerful in Australia. And I just have to move the image which is on that text there. We need to take the issue away from emotive questions of truth and falsity and to situate the sense-making engagement in the cultural domain where the realities facing people can be played with in informal ways, because that playfulness of culture is something that enables people to actually reframe the issues that they are experiencing. So to finish, it's just to play on this word hackers, it's the ability to create new things entering the world, but not always great things. So to me, it's this case study is actually looking at the ability to hack the narratives through community engagement with and stakeholder work. Thank you very much. And back to you, Neil, with your case study.
I have to say that we are past the presentational time. Would you like to?
Okay. No, I understand that. I was looking at the clock, and I think what I wanted to say to finish off is, I mean, I was going to present a little bit on the carbon farming case study, which is also an extremely exciting case study that's kicked off very, very quickly. Some of the people actually involved in it are participating now. We're not going to have time to present that, but I should say we're going to have a special session at the consortium meeting dedicated to the carbon farming. And we'll have an hour and a half together. So you're all welcome to that. And we also have other case studies that haven't kicked off yet. They will kick off later on in the year, one to do with forestry and bioeconomy. With that, I say thank you everyone very much. And we would love to hear from you and your questions to the work package.
Yes, I'm just going to pause here now, our recording. And so I will then welcome Martin, and you will start your presentation. So now we are into work package 1.
Thank you very much. Good to see all of you. It's a bit difficult to see maybe all of you in this way of seeing the screen. But my name is Martin. I work with the SLU and at Uppsala University. So I'm also part of this Mistra program. Today I will speak about what we call work package number 1, a very bureaucratic way of framing this, but it's about power and conflict and governance dialogues. And I will speak on behalf of a whole group of researchers and partners. So by necessity, it will only be part of the story of this interesting work that we are involved in. The intention was that Kaisa Raitio, my fellow researcher in this project, would also be here to speak more about conflicts, because we have like a focus both on power and conflicts and dialogues. And Kaisa is a conflict theorist, so she would have been here, but she sends her regards. She couldn't make it today, so you will have to settle with me. And I will try to provide you with a short insight into this work that we are doing. And the work that we are doing are being done together with a number of partners, a number of municipalities here in Sweden, and also county councils. And then we are also working up in the north with the Sami issues, so they're also with us. We are working with the Swedish municipalities and counties, the association SKR, Swedish Forestry Agency, and also SLU and Uppsala University. And also we have a bunch of talented researchers with us. Exciting group to work with. Some are here today, I think. Camilo and Lars, I saw before. So maybe Camilo and Lars, you can also fill in at the discussion at the end. So what we are trying to do is to look into these interesting tensions between power, conflict, and dialogue. I think when we think about dialogue, often we think about processes which are intended to be horizontal, perhaps consensual, about developing trust, about having communication on equal terms, including all people into discussions about important issues that we have in common. That is a very popular way of doing governance these days. We like to talk in terms of dialogues and collaboration. And when we do that, I think there's a tendency to maybe neglect issues of power and conflict. We might want to actually remove power. We might not want to think about processes in terms of power when we are doing dialogues. We might also think that dialogues are about maybe not to deal with conflicts, but rather to smooth them out a little bit, having a discussion about issues without really putting things on the edge. So these are the issues that we are dealing with. We think that it's important actually to include an awareness of both power and conflict in dialogues. We are doing that in different ways in this work package. We are trying to develop knowledge about power sensitive and conflict aware dialogues, and we are doing it based on the idea that we both need theoretical knowledge about these concepts, but also, and most prominently, practical knowledge. So we are working together with planners, together with citizens and different kinds of organizations to develop the kind of practical knowledge we need to do good dialogues. And we are looking into 4 cases. I don't have time today to go into depth with these 4 cases, but we are looking into urban development here in Uppsala, especially in the area of Gottsunda, where there is a lot of dialogues and a lot of reconstructing going on there. So that's an interesting group of planners who we are now currently looking into their stories about difficult situations that they have confronted in dialogues. Sometimes they deal with angry citizens. Sometimes they might deal with tensions within the organization of the municipality regarding priorities. And there are many different kinds of stories that we are looking into in order to learn about power and conflict. We have a case regarding water management in rural areas in Västmanland here in Sweden. It's a special scheme there going on where they try to bring in coordinators, facilitators to have dialogue with stakeholders around water governance. Very interesting process. Up in the north, we look into land use planning, issues about Sami rights, dialogues with county councils up in the north. Interesting case also. And we have also discussions around forestry management, and dialogues in forestry. So these are 4 interesting cases which we can tell you more about another time, but not today. Okay. So I will go a little bit more into what we are up to with these concepts. We are trying to, maybe it was mentioned is hacking, and that's one way of seeing it. I think we are trying to reframe, rethink. That's another way of, another kind of language for what we are up to. We are trying to think that some of the notions that are embedded in dialogue practices within governance are maybe needed to be scrutinized a little bit more critically. I think we have a tendency to enter into a language of participation, which might help us sometimes, but it might also hide certain issues. So we tend to say when we have dialogues, I think some of you have heard it, and also me included have said it sometimes, that we make the road while walking it. We trust emergence, and we believe that the process will guide us without any clear leadership. That I think could be a mistake, because we might then hide issues of power behind the language of participation, which might lead us to maybe not learn about these practices in an open-minded way, and also lead us to maybe disguise sometimes what we're doing, which could actually be seen as co-optations, perhaps even sometimes. Those who criticize dialogue claims that dialogue is actually about smoothing out conflicts and making it possible to carry on with business as usual. And we do not want to be exposed for that kind of critique. So then I think we need the language of power and conflict also when we deal with dialogues. When I talk to facilitators of dialogues, I talk to them, sometimes they are working within municipalities, sometimes they are consultants, specialists in process design and facilitation. They often talk in the terms that this, in the same kind of way as this facilitator did in Gothenburg when I interviewed him about difficult meetings he had about location of refugee houses. I think we would like to see, often as facilitators, we would like to see a movement towards shared understanding, shared power. We would like to see inclusive dialogues. At the same time, the conditions are not always in place, or maybe rarely in place, for those kind of dialogues. There are time constraints. There are decisions that needs to be made. There are other processes which are not possible to influence for the facilitators. So then, rather than always striving towards power sharing and having perfect conditions for communications, we need to think about what is the best we can do under those circumstances. And here I think there is of course a lot of practical work to be done in order to be able to find the space for change and the space for transformation in a particular process. But there is also a theoretical work to be done when it comes to the underpinnings, the ideas of participation, the ideas of dialogues. And here I think this work package is trying to make a contribution in order to develop a more broader understanding of power and broader understanding of conflicts in dialogue practices. And what would that mean then? I will just share this a little bit briefly here, but some of the ideas that we bring in regarding power comes from the work that I have done within my thesis. And what I tried to do was to provide a broader understanding of power, to provide an understanding of power which helps us both to see the kind of power that we often are interested in, the conflictual, illegitimate power, power which is oppression. That kind of power is certainly necessary to name and have a concept for, but we also need to have concepts for enabling power. So in a vocabulary of power, in a family of power concepts, we could think about power 2, which is actually the basic ability to act. So we can think about the power that provides us with the possibilities to be a facilitator, to be a citizen. There are these kind of agreements on what it means to be a planner, a citizen, a politicians, that provide us with the power too, the predictability that helps us to understand what's going on in processes. So this power too is kind of a basic ability to act that is needed also in dialogues. And that power too can then be used in the form of power with, which is consensual power. Power which is often decided in dialogues, the power that makes it possible to engage in concerted action, do things together, drawing towards similar aims. So that's the power with, when we are stronger together. But we also have other kinds of powers, namely the conflictual power. And then I think often we tend to think about power over, which is the process where one actor gets another actor to do something which they would not else do, as something that is undesirable in dialogues. But in a vocabulary of power, in a power family, we need to think also about legitimate power over. So, and perhaps that's the tension point where we will do a lot of work in this work package, to try to put words, conceptualize what legitimate power over might be. Because decisions needs to be taken. A facilitator will structure communication. Process designers will make choices about who to involve in the process. Who will be around the table, what kind of issues that we will talk about. So power over will be there whether we want it or not. So maybe one of the most important tasks is to put the language on that and try to make it open for scrutiny and also open for reflection, both among those who are like professionals, facilitator, but also among those who participate in dialogue processes. So here is a lot of exciting work to be done within this work package. And also this links to the issues about conflict, which I think Kajsa would have talked much more about today if she would have been here. So conflicts are actually when the power two, the social order that we have as a basis for our actions, are questioned in some ways, when there are different views of what would be a desirable way to proceed, where there might be different views of the roles and responsibility in the decision-making process that are best fitted for this particular issue. So conflicts arise then, and then we need to acknowledge those conflicts, but also work them out, and decisions need to be made, at least temporarily. So power over is also very important in relation to conflicts in dialogues. So I will now round up by just posing out some of the questions that we are currently curious about. We are looking into understanding empirically, understanding what's going on with power over in facilitation practice. We are looking into what legitimate power over might be that's contested. There are many different views about legitimacy in dialogues. Then we have issues about questions about the Sami situation. So we look at how is the nature and mediation of natural resource conflicts in northern Sweden affected by Sami rights. So that's an issue about rights in relation to dialogues. How do the different roles of stakeholders and right holders affect their roles in conflict mediation processes? We're interested in what happens when some of the actors in dialogues have certain rights, like the Sami people, for example, in relation to other actors in that process. Those are different subject positions, and what does that mean for dialogues? So this was actually my messages for today, and we are curious to have more dialogues, of course. That's our job in this VP. So please get in contact with us if you'd like to discuss more issues with us. And I think this is the opening for questions and comments. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this very interesting presentation. I was wondering, I think that somebody was, Raymond from Skogsstyrelsen, I think, had a question about...
Sanja,
Yes?
Sanja, I think you should stop recording now.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you.